The year is 20XX, and our boy Gene is casually standing on top of a speeding jet like it is a perfectly normal Tuesday. Spotting his target, he announces he has finally found what he is looking for and casually swan dives out of the aircraft. Down below, a teenager is frantically sprinting down a flight of stairs, screaming for anyone to help. This poor kid is completely cornered by two massive horned monsters. With tears streaming down his face, the kid begs for salvation, loudly declaring he does not care who steps up just as long as someone gets revenge on the freaks who ruined their world. Right on cue, our protagonist drops into the scene and slices one of the massive beasts into the past tense without breaking a sweat. He casually apologizes for his delayed arrival. The heavily injured teenager looks up at him with sheer awe, recognizing him as their ultimate salvation and asking if humanity can finally take their world back now. Gene assures him that he can rest easy. With a final breathless thank you, the teenager succumbs to the horrific injuries on his back and passes away, leaving our boy staring solemnly at the fallen survivor. A guy rocking a pair of glasses approaches the grim scene. This is Kagura, a scientist who delivers the absolute worst news possible. He tells Gene they were too late and that the kid was likely the very last survivor in the entire area. Kagura goes full doomsday prepper, insisting they just need to accept that humanity has officially reached its expiration date. He explains that rampant environmental pollution spawned heavily mutated monsters known as corruptors. These lovely creatures boast insane regenerative abilities and shrug off nuclear weapons like a light summer breeze. Even though humanity fought back, ran endless experiments, and finally invented a nanomachine countermeasure, Kagura points out the glaring issue that there is literally no one left to save. Gene completely ignores this pessimism, firmly stating there is still someone to save. When the glasses guy questions if there are actual survivors hiding somewhere, the MC clarifies he is talking about the distant future. He reminds the scientist that his newly invented nanomachines are designed not only to destroy the corruptors, but also to restore the environment of the planet. Gene smiles, predicting that once the world regains its beauty, a brand new, prosperous civilization will rise. Kagura dismisses this as a total pipe dream, but our boy happily admits he does not care. Holding on to that tiny sliver of possibility is more than enough. The scene transitions to a high-tech underground laboratory. Believing his overpowered skills might be needed in a future era, Gene decides his only play is to keep that hope alive. He officially activates cold sleep, effectively putting himself in the ultimate timeout. Time decides to hit the fast-forward button. The years tick by at an absurd rate, skyrocketing from a mere 5 years to a staggering 100 million years later. After 100 million years of uninterrupted nap time, an ancient access key is finally confirmed. Up above, a trio of kids sporting literal animal ears are running for their lives from a terrifying monster. The group consists of a determined girl, a chubby boy, and a crying kid with blue and green hair. The chubby one questions if their savior is actually hiding in a place like this, while the crying kid points out the very obvious fact that they are going to die if they are wrong. The brave girl aggressively clutches a necklace acting as a key and insists their guardian god is absolutely waiting for them. The trio reaches a massive door, only to realize they have hit a dead end. Inside the room, our boy is still peacefully snoozing in his high-tech capsule. The kids absolutely panic at the trap situation, and the girl, practically sweating bullets, screams out for the guardian god to save them. Her prayers are answered instantly as the capsule shutters open. Fulfilling the request like a magical genie, Gene absolutely obliterates the pursuing monster in one swift motion. He casually mentions to the stunned group that it was completely worth believing in the possibilities of the future. He stands before them looking incredibly heroic, holding a ball of pure glowing mana in his hand while also being completely buck naked. He casually observes that the storage box built by his old scientist buddy Kagura is top-tier work, noting that his clothes are still perfectly preserved after his massive 100 million year nap. Standing in the buff, he inspects the surrounding screens, finding it nothing short of a miracle that the displays are even functioning after an eternity of corruptor data dominating the servers. He figures he has the airborne nanomachines to thank for keeping the tech alive. Holding a message cube left behind by Kagura and casually gripping a nanomachine injector syringe, Gene thinks about how desperately he wants to know what happened to the world. However, he realizes he probably needs to deal with his current audience first. He politely pardons himself, finally acknowledging the group of kids who are currently staring at a completely naked man. The chubby kid is desperately trying to shield the younger one's eyes from the unexpected anatomy lesson. Our boy justifies his lack of attire by pointing out he has been asleep for 100 million years, but quickly agrees that the situation is less than ideal. He finally throws on some clothes, deciding this is a much better look. Stepping out of the high-tech bunker and into the blinding daylight, Jean takes a moment to appreciate the scenery. The world is incredibly lush and green, a massive upgrade from the apocalyptic wasteland he left behind. The brave girl who opened his pod clings to him excitedly, calling him their guardian god and urging him to follow them. Jean observes the group, his inner monologue going into overdrive. He knows humanity should be completely extinct, so he theorizes that these kids are an entirely different species that evolved to look human, likely influenced by the nanomachine. The fact that they speak his exact language is the solid proof he needs. Realizing he skipped the pleasantries, our boy formally introduces himself as Shadow Jean, telling them to just call him Jean. The brave girl introduces herself as Haka Maful, but says Haka is fine. The chubby kid introduces himself as Damper, and the crying blue-haired kid reveals his name as Shandy. As Haka leads him away, Jean casually asks what exactly they want him to do. Haka explains they are almost there, and drops the bomb that she needs him to defeat the corruptors. Jean is momentarily stunned that the monsters are still around. They arrive at a village that is currently starring in its own fiery disaster movie. The place is burning down, and Shandy immediately starts screaming for his mom and dad. Haka tries to hold him back while Jean quickly assesses the situation. He notes the wooden barricades and buildings, realizing the civilization is not exactly rocking high-tech advancements. Suddenly, a beast attacks an older woman who turns out to be Haka's grandmother. The grandmother spots Haka and demands to know why she came back to the danger zone. Jean clocks the beast, recognizing it instantly as a corruptor. He is mildly amused that they still use the same name after 100 million years. The grandmother orders them to run, but Haka absolutely refuses. Surrounded by a glowing green aura, she bravely declares she will save her grandmother. Jean watches with keen interest, viewing her reaction as the confirmation he needed. Without missing a beat, our boy steps in, casually kicking the monster away and saving the grandmother with a polite, "Excuse me." He then gives Haka the green light to attack. She summons a literal fireball and blasts the beast. Jean analyzes the aftermath, confirming that her attack utilized the nanomachine's power to completely halt the corruptor's regeneration. He wonders how she is controlling the airborne nanomachines, knowing only compatible humans should have that ability. Curious, Jean asks the grandmother if everyone in this era can casually throw fireballs. The grandmother is slightly confused by his phrasing, but explains that only 4 people in their village possess what they call holy power, herself included. Jean mentally translates holy power to the ability to control nanomachines. He then asks about the rest of the villagers. The grandmother explains they were evacuated but quickly pivots back to scolding Haka for returning. She drops the terrifying news that the corruptor they just fought was merely a newborn larva, and the main body is way above their pay grade. She warns that a massive horde of larvae will soon swarm the village. Just as the tension peaks, a wildly smug teenager struts onto the scene. He calls the grandmother an old hag and brags about slaughtering the small fry corruptors himself. When the grandmother asks about the villagers, the teenager assures her they are safe at the shelter. Haka's father also arrives, expressing his relief at finding her and asking where she ran off to. When Haka confesses they went to the sealed door, her grandmother is shocked that she visited the forbidden place. Haka fiercely defends her actions, reminding her grandmother of the old stories about the guardian gods sleeping behind that door, waiting to save them in their darkest hour. Hearing this, the grandmother sizes Jean up and mentally notes that he looks absolutely nothing like a deity. The smug teenager bursts out laughing, calling the idea ridiculous and referring to our boy as a lesser species. Jean is noticeably taken aback by the insult. Shandy, who is revealed to be the smug teenager's little brother, jumps to Jean's defense, insisting he really is the guardian god. The teenager ignores his brother, marching right up to Jean and pointing out his distinct lack of animal ears. He arrogantly concludes that Jean has 0 animal powers and is clearly just a lesser species who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Shandy argues back, pointing out that Jean defeated a corruptor. The teenager scoffs, assuming it was just a larva, and brags that he could one-shot those too. He aggressively points his spear right at Jean's face, completely annoying our boy. The teenager tells Jean to stay out of their village's business and orders the lesser species to back off. Haka's father asks the teenager, who is finally named Sauls, where he thinks he is going. Sauls, acting like he is the main character of his own anime, declares he is going to kill the massive corruptor himself and tells everyone else to sit back and tremble. The grandmother mutters that the boy is a fool, noting he would at least have a chance to survive if he just ran away. Jin stays completely silent during this exchange. The grandmother approaches him, admitting she has no idea who he is, but thanking him for saving her earlier. She practically begs him to go with her son and escort the children to the shelter while she goes after the suicidal fool, fully prepared to gamble everything on one final stand. Haka is immediately horrified by her grandmother's plan. Our boy simply smiles and flat out refuses the grandmother's request. With a confident grin, he states he has his own pride to worry about. He refuses to let some arrogant punk keep calling him a lesser species, only to go and get himself killed before Jin can prove him wrong. The scene shifts to the evening, where Jin is finally checking the message cube left by his old buddy Kagura. A holographic projection of the scientist flickers to life, starting with a deeply dramatic opening. "Can you hear me, Jin? If you are listening to this, I'm probably no longer in this world." Kagura immediately ruins the solemn moment by admitting he has always wanted to say that line. He then casually asks how the future is treating him, noting that the environment should be much better by now, but warns that there is a massive problem. Jin watches intently as the message continues. Kagura gets straight to the point, explaining that even with a fully recovered environment, the corruptors probably will not die out. The projection flashes back to Kagura's past, showing him checking in on the world over the centuries. He explains that he started noticing something was horribly wrong about 1,000 years after Jin went into cold sleep. While the total number of corruptors dropped significantly as the world healed, a new, highly evolved breed of monster began appearing alongside the environmental changes. Kagura admits he has no idea what kind of horrifying mutations these new corruptors will develop, but he guarantees they will be a massive threat. To counter this, he tweaked the nanomachines so that any new life forms that evolved would at least stand a fighting chance. More importantly, he left some serious upgrades specifically for Jin. Holding the syringe filled with glowing green liquid, our boy asks the hologram if this is the power he meant. Kagura explains that if Jin injects himself, the nanomachines will do the rest. He emphasizes that this is a power only Jin can wield since his genetically modified body is 100% compatible with the tech. Deciding to trust his old friend, Jin jams the syringe into his arm. Almost instantly, a glowing green circle that looks suspiciously like a magic spell, but is definitely just science, appears in front of him. A small, sharp knife materializes straight out of the circle. Jin is thoroughly impressed, realizing he can now generate physical objects just by commanding the nanomachines to change form. Kagura's message continues, revealing that he deliberately scattered these power-ups in hidden research labs all over the world. He did this partly to ensure the corruptors could not destroy all the upgrades at once, but mostly because he wanted to force Jin to travel and see the new world. He hopes that despite the new threats, this era is far better than the apocalyptic nightmare they left behind. As the message nears its end, the hologram glitches, revealing a much older, frailer version of Kagura. Jin is visibly shocked to see his friend looking so close to the end of his life. The elderly scientist smiles warmly and delivers his final instruction. "Enjoy the new world. I won't be able to see how it turns out. I'm counting on you to watch over it." Jin silently closes the cube, softly confirming that he understands his mission. The quiet moment is interrupted when Haka and the chubby Damper run up to him. Haka scolds him for hiding, while Damper excitedly mentions that the whole village has been looking for him. They practically drag him away, insisting that the celebration cannot start without the star of the show. Jin notices the necklace Haka is wearing and realizes it is the access key to his lab. He asks where she got it, and she proudly explains that it is a sacred charm entrusted to her clan by an amazing person a long time ago. She repeats the legend that it summons the guardian god when the village is in danger. Jin smiles to himself, deeply moved by the realization that Kagura has been looking out for him all this time. The trio arrives back at the village, which is now throwing a massive festival party in Jin's honor. Despite the festive mood, the locals who did not witness the fight are loudly doubting him. One villager points out that he still looks exactly like a lesser species, while another openly questions if the scrawny guy really beat a massive corruptor. Before Jin can even react, Sauls, the formerly arrogant teenager, violently punches the doubters right in the back of the head. Having completely swapped his personality, Sauls aggressively defends Jean, screaming at the cowards that they were too busy running away to witness the guardian god's absolute awesomeness. Jean just smiles, mildly amused by his aggressive new fanboy. Haka rolls her eyes at the sudden personality shift, while Damper bluntly tells Sauls he is acting like a completely different person from this afternoon. Haka's grandmother and father approach Jean to formally express their gratitude. The father states that the village would have been entirely wiped out without his intervention and practically begs to repay the massive debt. Jean tries to decline, but when they absolutely insist, he decides to ask for information about the current state of the world instead of material goods. The father is slightly taken aback by the request, but the grandmother quickly steps in. She advises him to head for the royal capital of the Kingdom of Colossia, explaining that it is the central hub for news and information. She notes that merchants from their village frequently travel the long, grueling road to sell their specialty silk threads. When Jean admits he has zero idea how to get there, the grandmother gently pats Haka on the head and suggests he take her along as a guide. She reveals that Haka also has business in the capital. Jean asks for details, and the grandmother explains that there is an academy in the capital specifically designed to help people develop their holy power. She admits she had almost given up on the idea after the recent attack, but still wants to enroll Haka as planned. Jean is mildly surprised that schools actually survived the apocalypse. Suddenly, Sauls dramatically interrupts, loudly declaring that he should be the guardian god's official guide. The grandmother shuts him down immediately, bluntly stating he has absolutely no business in the capital. Sauls aggressively argues back, announcing his grand plan to join the elite Holy Knights. The grandmother brutally roasts him, pointing out that he couldn't even get into the academy, so there is zero chance the knights will take him. Sauls angrily yells at the old hag in frustration. Jean casually asks if having holy power is not enough to get in. Haka deadpans that there is also a written exam, and since Sauls is a complete idiot, he naturally failed. Jean absorbs this information, quietly admitting he is definitely curious about these holy knights. Meanwhile, the scene cuts back to the glasses-wearing girl from the bushes, who is now frantically reporting to an actual holy knight on horseback. The knight confirms her story, asking if it is really true that the massive corruptor near Kadama village was defeated. She swears it is true and explains she was rushing back to the guildmaster to report the insane event. The knight notes that he rushed out here, assuming no regular knight could handle the threat, and he certainly never expected it to be handled before he arrived. He chuckles at the crazy coincidence of running into her. Just then, a corruptor attempts to sneak attack the girl from behind. Without even looking, the knight effortlessly slices the monster completely in half. Sporting a confident smile, he admits that if her story is true, he absolutely has to meet this mysterious powerhouse for himself. The morning kicks off with Jean taking a deep breath of the incredibly fresh air. He has a majestic moment taking in the lush green mountains and pristine environment, genuinely wishing his old buddy Kagura could see how beautiful the world has become. This poetic, peaceful reflection is abruptly ruined when Shandi, the blue-haired kid, nervously approaches with a folded pile of clothes, politely begging the guardian god to please put them on. Yes, our boy has somehow managed to end up standing completely buck-naked in the morning breeze once again. Realizing that public indecency is not the best way to start a road trip, he quickly gets dressed. It is time for farewells. The grandmother strictly reminds Haka to fulfill her duties as a guide. Meanwhile, the teenager Sauls is throwing a massive pity party, aggressively pouting about being left behind because he wanted to learn from his new idol. The grandmother brutally tells him to shut up and focus on his studies instead. Taking pity on the dramatic kid, Jean tosses him a bone, casually mentioning that his spear forms yesterday were not half bad, and promising to wait for him in the capital. Sauls instantly turns bright red, bursting into happy tears and aggressively vowing to study his heart out. Haka's father steps up next, politely asking the guardian god to take good care of his daughter before warmly telling Haka to stay healthy. With the goodbyes wrapped up, the duo finally hits the road, trekking past a scenic river and a picturesque little waterfall. Fast forward to the evening, and our travelers are setting up a cozy little campfire. Jean asks for an ETA to the capital, and Haka estimates it will take about 4 more days on foot. Our boy is pleasantly surprised by the short commute. Haka gets curious and asks why he is so interested in learning about the state of the world, but Jean playfully deflects, calling it a highly classified secret. Internally, Jean's brain is working overtime. He remembers Kagura's warning about the corruptors evolving, Since these monsters originally required heavily polluted environments to breathe, the fact that they are thriving in this fresh air means something massive and terrifying has changed. Haka violently pulls him from his thoughts, pointing out that he is currently wearing a terrifyingly intense facial expression. Jean quickly apologizes for zoning out. He privately decides his best game plan is to first figure out how modern humans fight the corruptors, and then investigate the beasts themselves later. Shifting the vibe, he begs Haka to please stop calling him Guardian God, and to drop the fancy honorifics. She tests out just calling him Jean, which he considers a massive upgrade. The peaceful camping trip is suddenly interrupted by the sound of approaching hooves. 3 heavily armored holy knights, 1 guy and 2 girls, casually roll up to their fire. The blonde male knight politely apologizes for crashing their campsite and asks for a moment of their time. When Jean asks who is asking, the man introduces himself as Argus Wilton, the captain of the 7th Squad of the Royal Capital's Holy Knights. Jean is immediately intrigued. A brown-haired knight with a ponytail, officially named Karina, completely loses her temper at the lack of respect. She screams at Jean for having the sheer audacity to remain seated while a captain is speaking to him. Showing significantly more class than his subordinate, Captain Argus dismounts his horse, apologizes for looking down on them, and approaches Jean directly. He formally asks where they came from and where they are heading. Haka answers honestly, stating they are traveling from Kadama village to the capital. Karina eagerly jumps off her horse with a wicked grin, loudly declaring that they have definitely caught their targets. She smugly points out that there are 0 birth records of any lesser species residing in Kadama village, proudly announcing that Jean has officially slipped up. Jean raises an internal eyebrow, wildly impressed that this post-apocalyptic country actually maintains a functioning tight-leash birth registry. Captain Argus immediately shoots Karina's theory down. He points out that Haka is wearing authentic Kadama cloth, an insanely expensive luxury fabric that is almost never wasted on children's clothing in the open market, proving she is absolutely a local. However, the captain then levels his sword directly at Jean. He states that Jean's outfit is completely foreign, matching absolutely no known nation. Argus explains that they have been hunting a group of bandits who use innocent-looking children as decoys to ambush travelers on this very road. Haka frantically denies the accusation, but Captain Argus coldly states that the knights will be the ones deciding the truth. Refusing to back down, Haka aggressively flares up her own holy aura, fully ready to throw hands to defend her guardian god. Without missing a beat, the captain summons his own terrifying aura, materializing a swarm of floating light daggers and pointing them directly at the brave girl to ensure she doesn't try anything funny. He commends Haka for possessing holy power, noting she's quite promising, but the lethal threat is crystal clear. Jean quietly analyzes the floating daggers, mentally confirming that this captain is an actually strong opponent. Argus glares down at our boy, demanding to know exactly where he is from, and promising to cut him down where he stands if he does not like the answer. Jean just stares back at him with a dead serious expression, choosing to respond with absolute, deafening silence. Our boy finally breaks the intense silence, coughing politely before calmly stating he came from Kadama village. Captain Argus sheathes his sword, easily recognizing that Jean is telling the truth. Haka proudly chimes in, declaring her savior as the official guardian god of the village. The captain quietly absorbs this bold claim, not one for awkward lingering. Jean bluntly asks if they are done here. Argus confirms they are, smoothly mounting his horse and offering a surprisingly polite apology for the aggressive interrogation, chalking it up to the hazards of the job. While the hot-headed Karina practically short-circuits in shock at the sudden de-escalation, the captain notes they are all heading to the capital. He promises to make up for the rude welcome if Jean ever runs into trouble there. With that, the knights ride off, leaving Karina loudly questioning her boss's sanity. Safely out of earshot, Karina completely loses her cool. She demands to know why the captain backed down so easily to a highly suspicious lesser species. Argus cryptically muses over the term, wondering out loud which one of them actually fit that description during the standoff. The green-haired knight, Rhea, fully agrees with her boss. Seeing Karina's utter confusion, Argus drops a massive reality check. He admits he secretly tried to make a move on Jean 3 separate times, but the man reacted before Argus could even twitch. When asked if he used his holy power, the captain delivers the real kicker. He could not even get it to activate. Karina is absolutely floored, confessing that she tried to summon her power too, but the so-called spirits completely refused to lend her strength. Rhea raises her hand, admitting she suffered the exact same embarrassing rejection. They quickly realize the power gap is so astronomically huge that only the Grand Captain back at headquarters could pull off an aura block of that magnitude. Argus tells the rookie Karina not to stress about it since Jean is simply existing in a completely different weight class. Rhea connects the dots, guessing Jean is the one who vaporized the massive corruptor. Argus confirms the theory. When Karina panics about leaving a walking weapon of mass destruction roaming free, the captain pragmatically points out that Jean seems harmless for now. Plus, they need to sprint back to the capital, leaving the petty bandit issue to the local guild. Secretly, Argus hopes the mysterious guardian god might eventually become a valuable ally for the country's much bigger problems. Back on the road, Jean reflects on the intense encounter. He admits the standoff was actually pretty interesting, and wonders if all the capital knights are packing that kind of heat. Haka quickly clarifies that the captain is built entirely different, standing at the absolute pinnacle of the elite holy knights, especially when it comes to the speed of his spirit arts. Jean raises a mental eyebrow at the terminology. Haka explains that borrowing power from the spirits is called holy power, and the resulting combat techniques are spirit arts. Jean mentally translates the local fantasy jargon into cold, hard science, realizing these post-apocalyptic kids are literally worshipping nanomachines as magical spirits. Jean's mind pivots back to Karina's favorite insult, prompting him to ask Haka about the whole lesser species concept. Haka dives into a massive lore drop, explaining that there are countless races in this era, with some looking like fish and others resembling insects. She shares an old legend from her grandmother, explaining that ancient humans had to physically mutate their bodies to survive in isolated, extreme environments. Jean mentally confirms that these animal locals are the direct descendants of the survivors from his era. He then asks about the people who never mutated. Haka confirms they are the ones labeled as lesser species. Because they lack specialized environmental adaptations, society heavily discriminates against them, leading to the horrifying reality that most slaves in this era are lesser species. Jean is instantly disgusted by the existence of a slavery system. However, Haka firmly states her own opinion, declaring that treating people terribly just because they look a little different is completely messed up. Jean is deeply touched by her strong moral compass. He warmly praises her for being a genuinely good kid, leaving Haka blushing and slightly confused by the sudden rush of dad energy. The heartwarming moment is abruptly interrupted when they stumble upon a severely beaten-up kid collapsed in the dirt. The girl, rocking a blue ponytail, looks like she just went 10 rounds with a freight train. Haka immediately rushes to her side, desperately asking if she is okay. Jean stands over the unconscious kid, his eyes locking onto one very specific detail. Peeking through the blue hair are perfectly normal, unmutated human ears. Haka immediately drops to her knees in the dirt, desperately trying to help the severely beaten blue-haired girl. Seeing the girl covered in awful bruises, Haka frantically asks if she is okay. Jean steps up calmly, telling her to hang on while he moves his hands to initiate a healing sequence. Before he can do anything, the injured girl suddenly springs to life. She pulls out a hidden dagger, grabs Haka, and takes her completely hostage. Pressing the blade close, the girl aggressively warns Jean that if he even twitches, she will end Haka's subscription to life. Jean mentally sighs, realizing they walked directly into a massive trap. He notes that if this was a setup, the rest of the crew must be hiding right next to them. Right on cue, the bandit boss drops his camouflage, proudly praising the girl for doing exactly what she was told. Jean's brain immediately dissects their trick. He recognizes it as stealth camouflage, a nanomachine function that perfectly mirrors the surrounding environment to make the user transparent. He notes the only downside is that the invisibility breaks the second you move, but admits the ambushers used it perfectly. 3 heavily armed bandits materialize and surround our boy. One of them arrogantly mocks Jean's fancy outfit, calling him a lesser species and demanding to know what rich country he wandered out of. Haka frantically shouts Jean's name, but the boss sharply orders her not to move. Desperate, Haka starts summoning her glowing holy power to fight back. Jean quickly shuts her down, loudly reminding her that using her anti-monster powers on regular humans is a terrible idea. Hearing this, the bandit boss hits the absolute jackpot. He stares greedily at Haka, thrilled to discover she possesses holy power, which instantly skyrockets her market value. Another goon violently kicks Jean, telling the lesser species not to get cocky. The boss immediately snaps at his underling, ordering him not to damage the merchandise. The goon argues back, pointing out that lesser species sell for literal pennies anyway, and doubting Jean has any real power. Putting the pieces together, Haka realizes in horror that these are the exact bandit slave traders Captain Argus warned them about. Deciding playtime is over, the boss summons his own holy power. He mockingly tells them it is time for a little nap and places his hand directly on Haka. As her vision fades, Haka panics, terrified that they are about to be sold off as slaves. The scene shifts. Jean is gently shaking Haka awake. She grudgingly comes to her senses and assures him she is fine, immediately demanding to know where they are. Jean casually looks around and confirms they are inside the bandits' main base, noting that everyone ambushed on the road gets dragged to this exact spot. Haka takes in the grim surroundings, seeing dozens of hostages locked in cages. She then looks back at Jean and completely deadpans, demanding to know why he is currently standing there in nothing but his underwear. Our boy casually explains that the bandits stole his clothes because they looked unusual, but notes they were at least polite enough to let him keep his boxers. Haka is utterly baffled by how chill he is being about the situation. Jean defends his relaxed vibe by pointing out he has spent the last 100 million years completely naked, so this is honestly an upgrade. Changing the subject, Haka demands to know why he did not just fight back, knowing full well he could have easily wiped the floor with them. Jean simply stays silent. The scene shifts outside the cage where the blue-haired girl is being ordered around by the bandit guards. They yell at her to hurry up and finish her chores. She approaches Jean and Haka's cell carrying some stale bread. Noting that they are finally awake, Haka glares at her with absolute fury. Looking down at the ground, the girl admits she does not mind if they hate her, sounding completely defeated as she whispers that she never expected to be forgiven anyway. Jean looks at her and bluntly states she's way too kind. He explains that actual villains do not waste a single second worrying about whether their victims hate them or if they will ever be forgiven. Without missing a beat, our boy casually grabs the heavy metal bars of the cage and snaps them open like dry spaghetti. The blue-haired girl practically drops her jaw in pure shock. Stepping out of the ruined cell, Jean casually mentions he was just waiting for her to come by so they could have a private chat without the guards eavesdropping. He cuts right to the chase, asking where the bandits are keeping the person she actually cares about. The girl is absolutely stunned and asks how he could possibly know that. Jean explains it was basic deduction. He admits her injuries fooled him at first because they were totally real, but he quickly realized that even absolute scum would not beat their own decoys this severely just to sell a lie. He figured out she was being forced to cooperate because the bandits were holding someone over her head. The girl begins to panic, tears welling in her eyes as she confesses they have her little brother. A painful memory flashes by, showing the terrifying moment the bandits kidnapped him. The boss brutally threatened to ship the boy off to a foreign country if she dared to resist. Crying openly, she reveals the bandits murdered her parents, leaving her with absolutely no choice but to obey them to keep her brother alive. Hearing this tragic backstory, Haka's anger completely vanishes, replaced by deep pity. Jean's internal temperature skyrockets into pure, unadulterated rage. Haka looks at him, finally realizing he let himself get captured on purpose just to track down the kidnapped brother. Jean confirms that was part of the plan. He explains that parasitic scum like these bandits are incredibly stubborn, comparing them to deep-seated stains. He notes that if you let even a single one slip away, they will just scurry off, rebuild their numbers, and go right back to ruining lives. Outside the holding room, a bandit guard hears a suspicious noise and steps closer to investigate. Jean finishes his thought, declaring that if you are going to wipe out garbage, you have to rip it out entirely from the root. Radiating a terrifying, ominous aura of absolute fury, Jean violently kicks the heavy reinforced door. The massive impact completely obliterates the door, launching the confused guard into orbit in one swift, brutal motion. The narration takes a deep dive into Jean's past, revealing that when it comes to dealing with absolute scum, our boy is basically a tenured professor with 100 million years of experience. A flashback shows a young Jean surviving on the gritty streets of his original era. He admits he used to admire the concept of justice, but quickly realized that a world desperate for justice is usually overflowing with trash. Since a peaceful, ordinary life was completely off the table in his apocalyptic environment, he chose violence. He spent his entire childhood and adult life relentlessly crushing the garbage of society. The flashback wraps up with his old scientist buddy, Kagura, dropping the heavy truth that Jean was simply born in the wrong world. Snapping back to the present, our boy is casually strolling down the bandit hideout hallways in nothing but his underwear, dragging an unconscious guard by the hair like a heavily discounted shopping bag. Two other goons spot him and demand he stop right there. Without breaking his stride, Jean casually yeets the unconscious guard directly into them, following up with a lightning-fast punch that sends another bandit straight to the Shadow Realm. The last standing goon practically loses his mind, screaming to know what kind of monster he is dealing with. Down in the basement, the massive commotion echoes through the ceiling. The blue-haired girl hears the absolute destruction happening upstairs and asks Haka just what kind of walking natural disaster her partner is. Haka proudly declares him to be the guardian god. The girl is entirely baffled by the divine title, but Haka assures her that as long as they leave the heavy lifting to Jean, they will be perfectly fine. She orders the girl to stick to Jean's plan and help evacuate the hostages. The blue-haired girl is still sweating with doubt, terrified because the bandit leader possesses insanely strong holy power, and she firmly believes mere brute force cannot possibly win against magic. Upstairs, the bandit leader is currently realizing he messed with the wrong underwear model. Terrified and backing away, he desperately tries to negotiate, offering Jean all the money he wants. When that fails, he points to a cage containing 3 terrified children and offers them up as slaves. Jean's eyes lock onto the cage, immediately spotting the blue-haired girl's kidnapped little brother. Ignoring the desperate sales pitch, our boy casually crushes the final underling standing next to the boss, politely asking the leader if he is quite done talking. The leader's brain is completely short-circuiting. He is internally screaming in panic because his fancy spirit arts absolutely refuse to activate, leaving him utterly terrified of whatever incomprehensible power Jean is passively radiating. Jean steps closer, verbally roasting the guy. He casually explains that he is lucky the boss is just a half-baked amateur. A real professional thug would have completely bailed the second things went south. He notes that pathetic amateurs always start by arrogantly looking down on their targets, and the absolute second they start losing, they immediately resort to groveling on the floor. Realizing his dignity is already dead and his life is next, the desperate leader pulls a hidden lever. He furiously declares that the fight is not over yet. A massive metal door opens, revealing an actual living corruptor that the leader had specially captured on request. Realizing kissing up will not work, the boss decides to just let the monster break Jean into tiny pieces instead. The freed corruptor immediately roars and throws a devastating punch straight at our boy. Jean does not even flinch, blocking the massive strike with zero effort. The leader stares in absolute disbelief. Jean casually drops a biology lesson, explaining that he was born with a genetically modified superhuman body packing several times the muscle fibers of a normal human. He casually adds that when it comes to fighting corruptors, he absolutely never holds back his holy power. Backing up his brag, Jean unleashes a blinding wave of nanomachine energy, instantly incinerating the massive beast into a pile of smoking ash in one swift move. The bandit leader is officially out of backup plans, completely horrified to realize this muscular guy can also use holy power. Jean fixes him with a dead serious glare and calmly asks what his next move is. Sweating bullets and trembling like a leaf in a hurricane, the leader pathetically asks if there is any chance he can just walk away. Jean answers the ridiculous question by launching his fist directly into the boss's face, sending the absolute scum into a very deep and well-deserved nap. Jean finally gets his clothes back, happily ending his brief stint as a post-apocalyptic underwear model. He tells the cheering, newly freed kids to hang tight for just a bit longer while he finishes up some administrative work. Poking around the bandit boss's desk for hard evidence, he opens a drawer and strikes gold. Finding a stack of official-looking documents, he hits a dramatic, triumphant smile, which instantly flatlines when he realizes he cannot read a single word of the modern alphabet. He mentally adds language tutoring with Haka to his immediate to-do list, still deeply curious about why street-level thugs were hoarding a live corruptor. Jean decides to play tech support. He taps into the airborne nanomachines, using them as makeshift security cameras to pull up the last week of stored visual data. A holographic playback reveals the bandit leader talking to a sinister-looking nobleman. The bandit asks what the grand plan is, and the lord cryptically brags that something incredibly interesting and absolutely perfect is about to happen in the country, flashing a wildly demonic grin. Jean watches the playback and is immediately annoyed by the exhausting cliché villain behavior. Outside the hideout, the authorities are efficiently rounding up the surviving bandits, while the freed hostages celebrate. The blue-haired girl spots her little brother Nino, and the siblings share a tearful, desperate hug. She turns to Jean and praises him like an actual deity, though our boy humbly requests she drop the god title. Jean looks over at the arresting officers and asks Haka if they belong to the local lord. Haka corrects him, explaining they are guild staff and pointing out the man in charge. The guild master, an older man named Patrick, approaches Jean and respectfully bows, thanking him for taking out such a massive criminal syndicate. Internally, Patrick's survival instincts are screaming. He notes that while Jean looks exactly like a lesser species, the sheer terrifying aura he passively radiates is anything but normal. Patrick explains that the guild has been drowning in damage reports, but the bandits just kept multiplying. Jean asks if the local lord handles this kind of mess, but Patrick scoffs at the idea. He clarifies that the guild reports directly to the king, acting completely independently of the nobility. He proudly states that even if their local ruler, Lord Chaffian, were secretly committing crimes, the guild would arrest him without hesitation. Jean mentally translates this local government structure, equating the lord to a corrupt mayor and the guild to the actual police force. Remembering his desk raid, Jean hands the stack of paperwork over to Patrick. The guildmaster is absolutely floored, realizing it is a comprehensive ledger of every single corrupt client who did business with the slave traders. Jean playfully jokes about the lord's name being on the list, but given the security footage he just watched, he privately accepts that the corrupt noble is definitely involved. Deciding he cannot fix the entire region's political corruption today, he pivots to a much more pressing issue. He points to the blue-haired girl and her brother, asking Patrick what happens to the orphan slaves. Patrick delivers an incredibly bleak reality check, explaining that the guild safely returns anyone with a known family, but orphans are left to fend for themselves. Since the siblings are lesser species, Patrick admits nobody will hire them, and there are absolutely zero shelters available. Jean's hatred for this era's discrimination flares up instantly. Refusing to leave them on the street, he asks the siblings if they would be willing to work if he found them a safe place. They both eagerly nod yes, desperately asking if he actually has a spot in mind. Jean flashes a wicked grin, suddenly remembering a certain holy knight captain who practically begged to return a favor. Our boy proudly announces he knows the absolute perfect workplace. Meanwhile, back in the royal capital of Kamosha, Captain Argus suddenly gets a massive, unexplained chill down his spine. His subordinate, Rhea, notices him shudder, but Argus waves it off. Arriving at his massive, luxurious estate, he officially dismisses his squad, ordering them to take a well-deserved rest day. The captain steps inside his grand mansion, greeted by a line of perfectly poised maids and butlers. However, the head butler is practically sweating bullets, looking like a man about to deliver the worst news of his career, apologizing for bothering his boss right after an exhausting expedition. The butler leans in and whispers a highly classified report. Up on the second-floor balcony, a mysterious blonde woman silently watches the tense exchange. Argus thanks the butler for the terrible update, his mind racing. Things in the capital are catastrophically worse than he thought. Corruptors have somehow breached the city walls, and Argus knows full well someone had to let them in on purpose. His top suspect is the heavily guarded Harness Academy, a notoriously stubborn institution that strictly forbids outsiders. Realizing he is stepping into a massive political minefield, Argus knows he needs powerful allies, and he needs them yesterday. The scene shifts back to our boy, who is now proudly leading a 3-kid squad down the road, completely oblivious to the political nightmare waiting for him in the capital. 3 days after the bandit raid, the traveling squad is making solid progress. The blue-haired girl is currently having a severe crisis of confidence, nervously asking if the capital would ever hire someone like her. Our boy instantly steps in as the ultimate hype man, reminding her that she has top-tier reading, writing, and math skills. His practical pep talk works wonders, leaving the girl beaming with newfound hope. Haka interrupts the heartwarming moment to point at the horizon, revealing the massive, bustling metropolis of the royal capital. Walking through the city gates, the blue-haired girl is completely mesmerized by the lively shops. Haka acts as the local tour guide, explaining that the capital heavily relies on imports, which is exactly why merchants from Kadama village frequently travel here to sell their high-end silk. Jean takes in the vibrant scenery, deeply impressed by the diverse melting pot of different races and cultures. He notes that the streets are remarkably clean and public order seems surprisingly decent. However, his optimistic observation takes a quick nosedive when he spots several desperate beggars sitting in the shadows. He mentally sighs, accepting the grim reality that every era, no matter how shiny, always comes with systemic poverty and corrupt nobles pulling the strings. Pivoting back to their main objective, Jean asks about the Academy's entrance exam. Haka confirms it is scheduled for next week. While they chat, a mysterious blonde girl lurking in the background narrows her eyes at the group, silently judging the fact that a lesser species is aiming to enroll in the prestigious Harness Academy. Unaware of the lurking hater, Jean tells Haka she has a comfortable amount of time to prepare since official enrollment kicks off right after the exams. Later that evening, the group finally secures a room at a local inn. Little Nino is burning off his endless toddler energy by using the mattress as a personal trampoline, while his older sister watches over him with a smile. Jean is just deeply relieved to see a proper bed. However, his brain immediately switches to finance mode. Existing in this fancy new era requires serious cash, and their bandit bounty money is definitely going to dry up, especially now that he is financially responsible for 3 growing kids. He decides he desperately needs to secure steady jobs for the siblings. He figures tracking down Captain Argus is the ultimate fast track to employment, but acknowledges he lacks the VIP connections to just casually knock on a holy knight's front door. Changing gears, Jean decides his top priority should be researching the modern evolution of the corruptors, especially after seeing shady politicians trying to weaponize them. Refusing to let this shiny new era turn into the apocalyptic wasteland he grew up in, he asks Haka how people usually look up information here. She explains that folks either rely on word of mouth or read incredibly expensive books, though her village usually shares theirs. She mentions that the capital actually has a massive library, which instantly sparks Jean's interest. He figures a national library is the perfect place to hunt for clues about Kagura's hidden research labs. The squad heads straight to the library, but their academic dreams are instantly shattered by a pink-haired receptionist rocking pigtails and a terrible attitude. She brutally rejects their entry, strictly explaining that the books are highly classified national property. Access is aggressively restricted to officially recognized academy students, faculty members, or registered nobles. Before Jean can even attempt to negotiate, Haka bluntly points out the hilarious irony that Jean literally cannot read the modern alphabet anyway. Jean internally facepalms, admitting that while Haka has been a great tutor, he is still basically illiterate in this era. While Jean is standing outside pondering his completely derailed plans, 2 highly suspicious street thugs are warming up in the background like they are about to make the worst decision of their lives. They quietly confirm that Jean's squad of lesser species is their designated target. One of the thugs aggressively steps up and throws a sucker punch right at Jean's head. Our boy blocks the strike with 0 effort, sarcastically noting that this is a truly fascinating way to say hello in a city that supposedly prides itself on public order. The thug completely ignores this sass, pulling out a blade and flexing his holy power right in the middle of the street. The blue-haired girl immediately panics at the blatant display of magic. Jean simply asks what these clowns actually want. The thug arrogantly explains that their mysterious client considers Jean to be a massive eyesore, casually advising him to permanently disappear from the capital if he wants to avoid a daily subscription to near-death experiences. Jean's brain immediately connects the dots. Realizing someone actually hired these goons means he can trace them back to their boss, which incredibly saves him a ton of investigative work. The arrogant thug goes in for a second strike, but Jean effortlessly grabs him and violently slams him straight into the pavement, completely rearranging his posture. The second thug, rocking bright red hair, absolutely panics and fires a nanomachine energy blast directly at our boy. Jean does not even blink, casually catching the lethal blast with his bare hand like it is a thrown baseball. He grabs the terrified red-haired thug by the collar, hoisting him entirely off the ground. While the thug trembles uncontrollably, Jean politely advises him to come back when he is actually leveled up, assuming he ever finds the guts to try again. Just as Jean winds up to deliver a devastating knockout punch, a highly familiar, incredibly angry voice screams for everyone to freeze. It is Karina, the hot-headed holy knight from the forest. She is absolutely furious, threatening to throw every single person into a dark cell for ruining her precious day off with a street brawl. Then she locks eyes with Jean. Our boy immediately drops the trembling thug, turns to the furious knight with a massive, calculated smile, and mentally celebrates that his plan to make a giant, highly visible public scene worked perfectly. Karina's brain completely short-circuits, and she points a shaking finger at him, screaming in pure shock as she recognizes the overpowered lesser species. The street standoff takes a sharp turn when Karina aggressively points her spear at Jean, sarcastically noting that it takes a special kind of nerve to start causing trouble 5 minutes after arriving in the capital. She doubles down on her elitist attitude, smugly stating that lesser species simply do not know their place. Before Jean can verbally dismantle her argument, a random lady passing by casually interjects. She confirms she saw the whole thing and clarifies that the thugs attacked first, making Jean's brutal response a textbook case of legitimate self-defense. Karina is visibly shocked by the testimony. She looks closer at the unconscious red-haired thug on the pavement, and her jaw drops when she recognizes him. she realizes these goons are actually enrolled students at Harness Academy. The helpful lady tells the knights to take the trash away, casually excusing herself and muttering about just wanting to enjoy some local street food. Jean notes out loud that holy knights apparently handle street patrols too, but the lady clarifies over her shoulder that they just help keep the peace in such a massive city. Internally, the lady is completely blown away by Jean's strength, knowing those academy students were definitely not weak. As she walks away, she advises Jean to try not to stir up too much trouble. Deciding to cash in a favor, our boy stops Karina from leaving and bluntly demands she take him directly to her boss. Fast forward to Captain Argus's luxurious estate. Argus is sitting there completely bewildered as Jean casually explains how his squad bumped into the exact bandit syndicate the captain warned them about, beat them to a pulp, left the scraps for the local guild, and broke out 2 kidnapped kids. Argus is internally screaming at the fact that Jean dismantled an entire crime ring solo. Jean points to the blue-haired girl and her little brother, explaining they have no family and face heavy discrimination, so he wants Argus to give them jobs. Argus points out that Jean is under absolutely no obligation to take responsibility for them. Our boy delivers a stone-cold philosophy. If he goes out of his way to save someone, he sees it through to the bitter end. The kids beam with absolute gratitude while Karina watches quietly from the sidelines. Deeply intrigued by Jean's sheer conviction, Argus agrees to let the siblings live and work at his estate, but adds one massive condition. In exchange, Jean has to become an instructor. A quick cut shows the newly hired siblings looking absolutely adorable. The blue-haired girl is rocking a crisp maid uniform, while little Nino is dressed in a tiny butler suit. Jean warmly compliments their new outfits, leaving the kids practically glowing with happiness. While Haka proudly watches over them, Argus firmly orders his senior staff to educate the new hires and absolutely forbids any discrimination against them based on their species. With the kids settled, the adults move to a private room. Jean immediately calls out Argus, knowing the captain has a massive ulterior motive for offering an instructor job. Argus praises Jean's sharp intuition and lays out the grim political reality. The king is terminally ill, and a brutal shadow war for the throne has already kicked off behind the scenes. The real nightmare is that a rogue faction with absolutely zero claim to the throne is actively using corruptors to seize power, dragging innocent civilians into the crossfire. Argus explains that these dangerous conspirators are hiding in the shadows of the capital, and he heavily suspects their main base of operations is Harness Academy. He needs Jean to infiltrate the stubbornly exclusive school and expose them. Argus knocks on a nearby door to introduce his inside contact, his own little sister, Miria Wilton, who is currently enrolled at the academy. However, the introduction goes up in flames instantly. The blonde-haired Miria stands up and throws an absolute fit, completely disgusted that her brother wants to put a lesser species in charge of their highly classified infiltration mission. She goes full elitist, brutally insulting Jean's existence and dismissing Haka as a pathetic country bumpkin. Haka is absolutely fuming. Karina actually leans over and whispers an apology to Jean, warning him that Miria's bias is incredibly severe. Jean hits Karina with a deadpan smile, internally noting the massive irony since Karina was hurling those exact same insults just a few hours ago. Miria continues her rant, arguing that the job requires actual teaching skills, not just sneaking around. Haka fiercely jumps to Jean's defense, trying to brag about his unmatched skills, but accidentally blurts out the incredibly embarrassing fact that Jean literally cannot read. Jean is instantly annoyed by the friendly fire, wishing she had kept that specific detail to herself. Miria scoffs, declaring an illiterate instructor completely useless, though she begrudgingly admits he is probably physically strong enough to keep unruly students in line. Putting the pieces together, Argus lets out an exhausted sigh. He realizes that his sister was the mysterious client who hired those academy thugs to test Jean in the streets. Argus profusely apologizes for his sister's terrible behavior, promising to lecture her later. Jean brushes it off, remaining completely unfazed. Getting back to business, Jean asks what exactly he is supposed to be teaching. Argus explains he wants him to teach spirit arts. When Jean asks for specifics, Argus lists the absolute basics like fire, lightning, and ice, noting that if Jean can use even 2 of those elements, he is more than qualified. Argus then cautiously asks if Jean is capable of using special spirit arts that only a tiny fraction of elite fighters can manage. Jean's competitive side instantly flares up. Intrigued that this era actually has a standard for being exceptional, he summons a swirling mass of nanomachine energy right into the palm of his hand. Flashing a wicked smile, our boy decides it is time to casually shatter this era's magical common sense. Exactly 1 week later, the highly anticipated entrance exam day arrives at the prestigious Harness Academy. Our hero strolls onto the campus accompanied by Captain Argus and a wealthy-looking noble named Lord Lehman. A faculty member warmly thanks the blonde knight for taking the time out of his incredibly busy schedule to visit. Argus politely brushes off the praise, explaining that the Holy Knight Squad simply takes turns sending one member to serve as a special guest instructor every year, and it currently happens to be the 7th Squad's turn. Jean internally questions if picking a guy who just learned what a modern book looks like is really the best choice for an academic role. The group is quickly escorted to the lavish office of the Academy's headmaster. She greets Argus warmly, recalling his days as her top valedictorian, and noting that the rumor mill has been buzzing about him juggling both corruptor hunting and messy political faction struggles. Leaning back in her luxurious chair, the director admits she understands why he is short on manpower, but she points a highly skeptical finger directly at our boy, aggressively questioning if Argus seriously intends to make a man like that an official instructor. Argus firmly stands his ground, confidently declaring that our protagonist is the single most capable fighter in his entire unit when it comes to combat techniques. The headmaster is noticeably unconvinced. Before the debate can continue, an incredibly snobby instructor named Salaja loudly objects, throwing a massive elitist tantrum. He declares it entirely unprecedented to let a so-called inferior species taint their sacred academy. He aggressively asks if Argus is actively trying to bring shame upon the institution. The headmaster turns to Lord Lehman for his input, and the noble completely agrees with the snobby instructor. Lord Lehman warns that putting someone of Jean's status in a position of power will undoubtedly trigger a massive furious backlash from both the noble-born students and the elite faculty. The headmaster admits her own emotional bias aligns with the nobles, but decides to at least hear the candidate out. Stepping up to the plate, our boy delivers a flawlessly polite bow and introduces himself gracefully. The director is deeply intrigued by his icy composure, noting that he remained perfectly calm despite being openly mocked to his face. Jean then springs a brilliant logical trap, calmly asking the room if he is considered unfit simply because of his race, or if he is being rejected because he lacks the necessary teaching abilities. The headmaster immediately takes the bait, declaring that skill is obviously the only thing that truly matters. She challenges him to prove his worth. Without missing a beat, Argus suggests they settle the debate with a practical, hands-on test. The scene shifts to the Academy's pristine spirit magic practice field. Salaja, acting as the designated opponent, smugly notes that the empty campus will conveniently spare our hero the embarrassment of a highly public defeat. Jean just stares back at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated exhaustion, silently wondering what on earth this guy is rambling about. Stepping in as the official referee, the headmaster lays down the ground rules. Since Jean is applying to be a spirit magic instructor, he is strictly forbidden from using physical combat and must rely entirely on magic to prove his actual strength. Unbeknownst to the overconfident faculty, a crowd of curious students begins to gather on the sidelines to watch the spectacle, including Argus's highly prejudiced little sister, Miria. A few students whisper in excitement, noting that this might actually be the very first time anyone has seen the snobby Salaja in a real fight. As the match is about to begin, the headmaster privately hopes to see the absolute limits of an inferior species. Across the field, the arrogant instructor prepares his attack, internally scoffing at the idea that someone with such low physical abilities and trivial divine power could ever pose a threat. Fully convinced of his own superiority, he asks if our boy is prepared, summons a massive blazing fireball, and launches the first strike. Jean casually sidesteps the inferno with zero effort. Noticing the growing audience, the snobby instructor decides to put on a show. He hurls a crackling bolt of lightning directly at our protagonist, but Jean effortlessly dodges once again. Mistaking this casual evasion for pure terror, the arrogant valedictorian starts verbally flexing. He loudly brags that while he may not be a holy knight, he graduated at the absolute top of his class and mocks Jean for doing nothing but running away like a typical inferior species. Deciding he has officially reached his daily limit for elitist monologues, our boy decides to wrap up the circus act. He mentally notes that his world-ending nanomachine powers were never designed to be used on fragile human targets, but figures a tiny, non-lethal demonstration is in order. Without lifting a single finger, Jean abruptly flattens the arrogant instructor directly into the dirt. An invisible crushing force pins the man to the ground, leaving him looking like a highly confused flattened pancake. The entire audience completely loses their minds. The opponent, the students, the headmaster Lord Layman, and even Captain Argus are left staring in utter shock, completely unable to comprehend what just happened. Strolling up to his newly immobilized opponent, Jean casually explains that he merely tweaked the local gravity around the man's body. With peak savage energy, our hero notes that since the supposed top-tier instructor is entirely unfamiliar with such a basic concept, there is clearly a massive amount of knowledge he needs to teach at this academy, and not just to the students. Our protagonist stands completely unbothered while his flattened opponent desperately struggles to peel himself off the dirt. With a casual flick of his finger, our hero turns the gravity back to normal. The trembling instructor demands to know what just happened. Our boy casually replies that it was just a little spirit magic, brushing it off like it is absolutely no big deal. The opponent completely loses his mind, screaming that he has never heard of magic like that and violently accusing his rival of using some underhanded trick. Our protagonist just gives him a tired, unimpressed look. The headmaster claps her hands, officially declaring the debate completely settled, and Argus firmly agrees. Meanwhile, the spying students are absolutely shell-shocked. Argus's sister practically short-circuits, realizing that was definitely a highly specialized form of magic. She is completely baffled as to how someone from a so-called inferior species, lacking the evolutionary blessing of the spirits, could possess such terrifying power. Down on the field, the humiliated instructor actually grabs our hero by the collar, throwing a massive tantrum. Our boy simply tells the overgrown toddler to calm down. Fast forward exactly 1 week to the Academy's official enrollment ceremony. The headmaster stands before the massive crowd of fresh students, delivering a brutally honest welcome speech. The school's true purpose is to forge hardcore warriors capable of slaughtering the monstrous invaders. She warmly adds that anyone who fails to keep up will be mercilessly kicked to the curb, but the survivors might actually achieve their dream of joining the elite Holy Knights. Up in the stands, the older students are casually gossiping. A red-haired upperclassman approaches the blonde sister, acting surprised to see her slumming it at the freshman ceremony since she usually hates socializing. She immediately throws the exact same observation right back at him. The guy smoothly admits he is just here to network and get buddy-buddy with any famous nobles joining the roster. Suddenly, the red-haired student spots our boy casually chilling in the VIP instructor seating. He is absolutely appalled to see a lesser species in a chair of authority. The sister bluntly confirms that the man is indeed an official instructor. When she asks for his opinion on the matter, the red-haired guy dismissively scoffs, stating that no matter the title, the guy is still just an inferior species. The sister mentally agrees with the toxic assessment. Meanwhile, our protagonist scans the massive campus. He realizes investigating this colossal school is going to take a ridiculous amount of time. He also acutely recognizes that his current reputation as a lowly outsider makes him stick out like a sore thumb. If he starts snooping around now, he will look like the most suspicious person in the entire zip code. He internally decides his very first mission is to completely obliterate his inferior image and earn their actual respect. The scene shifts to the first day of classes. The humiliated instructor from the courtyard is back, sporting a wildly fake smile as he kicks off the spirit magic lecture. He warns the elite students not to let their guard down or get overtaken by the freshmen. Internally, this petty professor is absolutely gloating. He notices the suspiciously low attendance and proudly congratulates himself for spreading malicious rumors beforehand to ensure nobody would want to listen to a lesser species. Acting like a perfect gentleman on the outside, he invites his new colleague to step up and introduce himself. Our hero steps to the podium, calmly introducing himself and announcing he will be taking over their spirit magic curriculum for the foreseeable future. The red-haired student immediately pipes up with peak disrespect, questioning if our boy can actually handle the job. Our protagonist is completely unfazed, telling the brat that the value of the class is entirely up to them, and they are free to skip if they want. However, he lays down one strictly non-negotiable rule. They must absolutely never use this power against other human beings. He drops a quick science lesson disguised as magic theory, explaining that this power was specifically designed to halt the insane regenerative abilities of the invaders. Using it on a regular human body just results in completely pointless, brutal injuries. The blonde sister is noticeably taken aback by the heavy warning. However, another incredibly arrogant student completely misses the point. Bursting into loud laughter, he mocks our boy, claiming the new teacher is just a powerless coward who made up a fake rule because he is terrified of getting hurt when compared to real magic users. The rest of the class joins in on the mean-spirited laughter. Deciding playtime is officially over, our hero hits the class with an ultimatum. He challenges the loudmouth to fire his absolute strongest spell directly at him. Our boy promises that if the student manages to land even a single scratch, he will permanently resign and never show his face again. The arrogant student happily takes the bait, summoning a massive, crackling spear of pure lightning. The petty instructor absolutely panics, screaming at the idiot to stop, because he is standing right in the splash zone. Ignoring the warning, the student aggressively hurls the lightning spear. In a fraction of a second, our protagonist effortlessly deflects it and fires a razor-sharp dagger of energy right back. The projectile cleanly slices off a tiny chunk of the student's hair before he even realizes he was in danger. The room plunges into dead silence. The terrified student is completely frozen in confusion. Our boy coldly informs the room that if he had actually wanted to, that attack would have instantly ended the kid's subscription to life, adding that judging people purely by their appearances is a fatally stupid mistake. The red-haired student is having a full-blown existential crisis, completely mind-blown by the speed and power of the spell. Flashing a brilliantly wicked smile, our hero delivers the ultimate mic drop. He notes that they called him an inferior species because they assumed he was weak, but since he just proved he is vastly stronger than all of them combined, he kindly provides them with the correct title they should be using from now on: Teacher. Our hero turns to the arrogant student who just tried to fry him and asks if the kid even knows the basic conditions for activating spirit magic. The student confusedly explains that it is all about visualization, raising your divine power, picturing the force you want to project, and manifesting it to the spirits. Our boy flashes a knowing smile, clarifying that while visualization is definitely important, the true trigger is sending a highly specific wavelength to the spirits, or rather, the nano-machines. He completely shatters the Academy's curriculum by listing the 8 fundamental wavelengths. He notes the standard fire, lightning, wind, and freezing that they all know, but casually adds the highly advanced gravity manipulation, light intensity manipulation, atmospheric pressure manipulation, and space protection to the list. Upon hearing that our protagonist can effortlessly wield all 8 types of magic, the petty instructor in the corner looks like his soul is actively trying to evacuate his physical body. Having successfully broken their magical common sense, our boy cheerfully announces the official start of the lesson. Later on, our hero is strolling through the sprawling academy campus. He desperately wants to investigate the premises, but the sheer volume of students milling around makes it impossible to snoop without drawing a crowd. He realizes he needs to locate a highly restricted area. Suddenly, Argus's blonde sister, Miria, marches up to him, demanding to know his true identity. Miria bluntly admits he is definitely not normal, pointing out that an inferior species absolutely should not be able to juggle every single type of spirit magic. Our protagonist casually mentions that he just taught the class how anyone can do it by simply switching wavelengths. The blonde sister shoots that logic down immediately, arguing that if it were truly that easy, he wouldn't be drawing a massive crowd of highly suspicious onlookers. Realizing they need privacy, she quickly drags him away. Once safely out of sight, Miria repeats her interrogation. Our boy honestly replies that he is just an ancient human who took a 100-million-year nap in Kadama village. Assuming he is just an incredibly committed joker, she humors him and asks what his job was 100 million years ago. A wave of nostalgia hits our hero as he remembers his past life like it was yesterday. He explains he was an agent, someone who worked his absolute fingers to the bone for his country by crushing countless villains. Miria asks how a hardcore agent ends up sleeping for an eternity. Our boy admits his ultimate failure, explaining he was arrogant enough to think he could handle the apocalypse all by himself, which ultimately resulted in him losing absolutely everything. He softly adds that he specifically took this instructor job so that when push inevitably comes to shove, he will have a whole class of reliable students to back him up. Miria listens quietly, completely unsure how much of the crazy backstory is actually true. Changing the subject, our protagonist asks why the elitist noble is suddenly playing hide-and-seek with him. Miria brushes it off, claiming she is just fulfilling her duty as his official guide. They arrive at a shady, incredibly dusty storage room meant for lecturers. Miria pulls out some documents, revealing she has been running her own secret investigation. She explains there is an unnatural void on the Academy's blueprints right next to this room, large enough to hide an entire second facility. Before she can even finish explaining her theory, our boy spots a tiny owl statue that is highly suspicious because it is the only clean object in the dust-covered room. Relying on his veteran intuition, he twists the owl, causing the heavy bookshelves to slide open and reveal a hidden passageway. Miria is absolutely shocked that he solved the puzzle in 5 seconds. Our hero credits her brilliant deduction and tells her to wait behind, warning that corruptors are incredibly dangerous. Miria simply flashes an arrogant smile, proudly declaring her grades are top of the class, and her combat skills rival her brother's. Respecting her confidence, our boy agrees to let her tag along. The duo begins their long descent down a deep, dark underground staircase. Our protagonist casually uses light-intensity manipulation to illuminate the path, a trick the blonde sister finds incredibly convenient. Our boy notes that the eerie atmosphere feels exactly like a fantasy video game dungeon right before a boss fight. Miria brings the conversation back to his supposed villain-crushing past, asking if his veteran instincts have already pinpointed a prime suspect among the faculty. Our hero notes she is demanding a lot for his first day on the job, but admits Lord Lehman is his top suspect. When Miria asks for his reasoning, our boy explains that while the noble appears perfectly calm in conversation, his mind completely checks out when he is alone. Our hero recognizes this is a classic symptom of someone being forced to do terrible things against their will. He adds that Lehman is abnormally guarded despite trying to play it cool. Miria admits she actually suspected Instructor Salaja, the petty instructor. Our boy immediately dismisses that theory, pointing out that Salaja's emotions are hilariously easy to read on his face. Because Salaja completely lacks a two-faced nature, our protagonist concludes he is actually a decent person at heart, just incredibly petty. They finally reach the bottom of the stairs, stepping into a massive cavernous underground space. Miria is absolutely mind-blown that such a colossal room exists directly beneath the academy. She asks if he has found anything suspicious. Our hero stares dead ahead, completely speechless. He mentally admits he never in a million years expected to find it here. Sitting right in front of them is a highly advanced high-tech door leading directly into one of the secret nanomachine research labs left behind by his old friend Kagura.
And that's where we wrap up today's video. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. If you've enjoyed this one and want to see more, leave your comment down below. Also, don't forget to drop a like to support our channel and subscribe to stay up to date everything that comes out. See you next time. Bye-bye. And a big hug to everyone. I'm out.